There's a strange phenomenon that keeps showing up in hip-hop, one that fans have picked apart for years without ever fully explaining it. Certain artists, months or even hours before they were killed, said or created something that lined up eerily with how they actually died. Sometimes it's a lyric written years in advance that reads like a police report after the fact. Sometimes it's a final interview where an artist talks about fame putting a target on their back, right before it did exactly that. None of this is really about the supernatural. A lot of these artists were living in genuinely dangerous circumstances, and rapping honestly about that reality meant their art was always going to brush up against the risks they were actually facing. But the timing in some of these cases is hard to shake off. So today we're looking at rappers whose own words or actions lined up with their deaths in ways that are still talked about years later. King Von. You'd expect an artist's debut album to be the beginning of a long story. For King Von, it ended up being close to the whole story. Davon Bennett grew up in O Block, one of the most talked about blocks in Chicago, before turning that upbringing into a rap career built almost entirely on storytelling. He didn't start rapping seriously until 2018, after beating a murder case that had kept him tied up in the legal system for years. Once he was free to focus on music, his breakout song, Crazy Story, that same year racked up millions of views for the way he narrated street conflict like a short film. And by 2020, he'd signed with childhood friend Lil Durk's label, moved to Atlanta, and built a real national following off tracks like All These and 2 AM, songs that walk listeners through the exact kind of late-night confrontations that define drill music. On October 30th, 2020, Von released his debut studio album, Welcome to O Block. It debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200, his first and only album to come out while he was alive. The album was full of the same vivid, blow-by-blow storytelling that made his name, songs about being surrounded outside a club, about violence erupting out of nowhere in a parking lot, about not knowing if a night out was going to end the way it started. Exactly 1 week later, on November 6, 2020, Von was outside the Monaco Hookah Lounge in Atlanta with a group of friends when an argument broke out between his group and another group in the parking lot. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, that argument escalated into gunfire within moments, and Von was shot during that initial exchange before police even arrived on scene. He died from his injuries that day. He was 26 years old. The album that would go on to define his legacy had been out for exactly 7 days. Critics and fans alike have pointed out for years how closely the record's subject matter, sudden violence outside a nightclub, a night that turns fatal in an instant, mirrors what actually happened to him. Nobody's claiming Von saw the future. What he did was rap with total honesty about the world he actually lived in, and that world eventually caught up to him in almost the exact way he'd been describing it for years. If Von's story feels like art catching up to reality by pure coincidence of timing, the next case is about an artist who may have handed his location to the people who killed him without even realizing it. Pop Smoke. Pop Smoke's rise happened almost too fast to process. His breakout single, Welcome to the Party, turned him from a Brooklyn unknown into a national name over the course of a single summer in 2019, his booming voice and grimy drill sound catching on with everyone from Nicki Minaj to Travis Scott, both of whom he'd go on to collaborate with. His mixtape, Meet the Woo 2, arrived in February 2020 and debuted in the top 10 on the Billboard charts within days, and he had a national headlining tour scheduled to kick off in less than 2 weeks, the kind of stretch that should have marked the true beginning of his career rather than the end of it. On the night of February 18, 2020, Pop Smoke, real name Bashar Jackson, was staying at a rented Hollywood Hills home. That evening, he posted an Instagram story showing off gift bags he'd received from a fashion brand, rapping along to his own song in the clip. One of those bags had a shipping label visible in the video, with the home's address printed on it. Around the same time, a friend of his posted a separate photo of the two of them holding stacks of cash, with the location tagged to the same Hollywood Hills neighborhood. At around 4:30 in the morning, masked intruders broke into the home. According to police testimony, they confronted Pop Smoke, who ran from the bathroom before being shot. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. He was 20 years old. Multiple people were eventually convicted in connection with the killing, including a co-defendant who admitted the crime was a robbery gone wrong, not a targeted hit. But investigators didn't leave the social media question open to speculation. LAPD's robbery. Homicide Division stated afterward that it was their belief the group targeted the home specifically because of what had been posted online, telling reporters the post likely contributed to the suspects knowing exactly where to find him. In other words, according to the police who investigated it, Pop Smoke may have unknowingly broadcast the exact location where he'd be killed just hours before it happened. Pop Smoke's case is about a location given away by accident. This next one is about an artist who spent his entire final Instagram live talking directly about what he wanted people to remember if he didn't make it. XXXTentacion. X built his entire career and his entire public persona around raw, unfiltered honesty, so it makes a certain amount of sense that his final public words ended up sounding like exactly that. Jose Onfroy broke out in 2017 with Look at Me, a song that turned him into one of the most streamed young artists in the country almost overnight. Despite him rarely doing traditional press, he preferred speaking to fans directly through SoundCloud and social media instead, building a fiercely loyal following that stuck with him through a genuinely turbulent public life, including domestic violence charges from an ex-girlfriend that were still pending against him at at the time of his death. At some point in the months before he died, X went live on Instagram and talked candidly about his own mortality. If worst thing comes to worst and I fiend die or some and I'm not able to see out my dreams, I at least want to know that the kids perceive my message, he said in the clip. If I'm going to die or ever be a sacrifice, I want to make sure that my life made at least 5 million kids happy. The video wasn't dated at the time it was recorded, but it resurfaced within hours of his death and spread everywhere. On June 18, 2018, X had just left Riva Motorsports, a motorcycle dealership in Deerfield Beach, Florida, after withdrawing $50,000 in cash from the bank earlier that day. As he was leaving in his BMW with a friend, an SUV blocked his car in the parking lot. Two masked men got out, demanded his belongings including the cash he'd just withdrawn, and shot him multiple times during the struggle before fleeing. He was pronounced dead shortly after. He was 20 years old. 3 men were later convicted of first-degree murder and armed robbery in connection with his killing, receiving life sentences without parole. Just weeks after his death, X's team posthumously released the music video for his song, Sad, which he had personally written and directed before he died. The video shows him walking into a church, approaching his own open casket, and physically fighting his own dead body in front of a full congregation. It ends with a handwritten note from X himself, reflecting on his uncle's struggle to change and leave his past behind. Whether the Instagram Live was truly about a real premonition or simply an artist being candid about the risks of his lifestyle, and whether the funeral imagery in Sad was meant as literal foresight or just dark symbolism, is something fans have debated for years. What isn't up for debate is how closely both ended up lining up with what actually happened to him just months later. X's case is about a message that came from him directly, in his own words, months before he died. This next one is about a video, filmed months in advance, that ended up airing like a dress rehearsal for the real thing. Tupac Shakur. By 1996, Tupac Shakur wasn't just a rapper, he was arguably the most influential voice in the genre, an artist whose music, acting career, and outspoken politics had made him one of the most recognizable people in the country, regardless of whether you listen to rap. His album All Eyes on Me, released that February, debuted at #1, and eventually went 9 times platinum, cementing him as Death Row Records' biggest star. In May 1996, months before anything happened to him, Tupac filmed the music video for I Ain't Mad at Cha, a song reflecting on old friendships and forgiveness. The video shows Tupac and a friend, played by actor Bokeem Woodbine, leaving a party at night when a hooded gunman approaches and opens fire. Tupac's character is struck by the bullets, pushes his friend out of the way, and dies in the back of an ambulance. The final scenes show him arriving in heaven, reunited with deceased music legends like Marvin Gaye, Miles Davis, and Billie Holiday. On September 7, 1996, Tupac attended a boxing match at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, where video footage captured him and members of his entourage in a physical altercation with Orlando Anderson, a man affiliated with the Los Angeles gang. Hours later, while Tupac rode as a passenger in a car driven by Death Row founder Suze Knight, a white Cadillac pulled up beside them at a red light and opened fire, striking Tupac 4 times. He survived for 6 days on life support at a Las Vegas hospital, before dying on September 13, 1996, at the age of 25. His murder remains officially unsolved, though Nevada prosecutors indicted a man named Dwayne Davis in 2023 in connection with the shooting, a case that is still working through the courts. 2 days after Tupac's death, I Ain't Mad at Cha was released as a single. The video that had been filmed months earlier, showing him gunned down after leaving a public event and dying shortly after, was suddenly airing on television next to news coverage of his actual funeral. A Death Row Records spokesperson at the time called it, in his own words, a case of life imitating art. Nobody involved in making the video could have known how closely it would end up mirroring what actually happened, but the timing of its release made that resemblance impossible to ignore. If Tupac's video felt like a haunting coincidence to the public watching it unfold, the final case on this list involves an artist who put the exact same feeling directly into a song title, only to have it become the name people would use to describe his own murder for the rest of hip-hop history. The Notorious B.I.G. Biggie spent 1997 finishing the album that was supposed to make him the biggest rapper alive. Christopher Wallace's 1994 debut, Ready to Die, had already established him as one of the most gifted lyricists in the genre and made him the face of Sean Combs' Bad Boy Records. And by early 1997, he was putting the final touches on his follow-up, an album built to be even bigger. That same period saw the East Coast-West Coast rivalry that had defined hip-hop for years reach its most dangerous point, with Biggie publicly trying to distance himself from any involvement in the September 1996 murder of his former friend turned rival, Tupac Shakur. Part of Biggie's new album was a song called You're Nobody Till Somebody Kills You, featuring a hook he sang himself, built around the grim idea that in his world, real fame and real danger were the same thing. In February 1997, Biggie traveled to Los Angeles to promote the album and film the video for its lead single, Hypnotize. He also gave an interview to a San Francisco radio station on March 5th, in which he openly discussed hiring additional security because he genuinely feared for his safety. A real, on-the-record statement statement made just days before his death, not something pieced together after the fact. 3 days later, he presented an award at the Soul Train Music Awards, where he was booed by part of the crowd, a reflection of the ongoing East Coast, West Coast tension that had already claimed the life of his friend turned rival, Tupac Shakur, 6 months earlier. On the night of March 8, 1997, Biggie attended an after-party at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. Just after midnight, as he left in an SUV with his entourage, the vehicle stopped at a red light roughly 50 yards from the venue. A man in a nearby car rolled down his window and fired multiple shots into the SUV, striking Biggie 4 times. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the same hospital where Pop Smoke would later be pronounced dead, and was declared dead shortly after. He was 24 years old. Like Tupac's case, Biggie's murder has never been officially solved, despite decades of investigation and competing theories about who was responsible. 16 days later, on March 25, 1997, Bad Boy Records released Life After Death exactly as planned. The album's title, chosen well before anything happened to him, suddenly read less like a clever phrase and more like something close to literal. You're nobody till somebody kills you. Sat on that same album, his hook now carrying a weight nobody involved in writing it could have intended. The song wasn't written as a prophecy, and Biggie wasn't trying to predict anything. But between the song title, the radio interview about hiring security, and an album called Life After Death arriving just over 2 weeks after his actual death, it's easy to understand why this case is still the one most often brought up whenever this subject comes around. Lil Peep's story closes out the 2 cases where the danger came from inside rather than from someone else. But before we get there, there's one more case worth including. An artist whose warning wasn't a specific detail lining up with his death, but a general sense of his own mortality that he put into words years before anyone acted on it. Chinx. Lionel Pickens, who performed as Chinx and earlier in his career as Chinx Drugs, came up in the Far Rockaway section of Queens, New York, and built his name as part of French Montana's Coke Boys collective, appearing across their mixtape series and contributing to the widely circulated song I'm a Coke Boy. By 2015, he was working on his debut solo album, titled Welcome to JFK, and had built real momentum through frequent collaborations with artists like Meek Mill. On a song called Maybe, Chinx rapped about processing the loss of a friend who died living the same lifestyle he did, and about accepting that the same fate was always a real possibility for him too. Death's a sure thing, kids left to hold your name, he rapped, going on to say he'd probably see his fallen friends again on the other side. It wasn't a specific description of how he'd die, the way some of the other cases on this list are. It was closer to a plain acknowledgement that in the world he came from, violent death wasn't a distant hypothetical. It was something close enough to expect. On May 17, 2015, Chinx had just finished a performance at a Brooklyn nightclub and was driving through Queens with a friend, Antar Aldiati, when another car pulled up alongside them and opened fire before speeding off. Both men were struck multiple times. Chinx was taken to a Queens hospital where he died from his injuries. He was 31 years old. Aldiati survived. Years later, prosecutors in Queens charged 2 men, Jamar Hill and Quincy Homer, with second-degree murder and attempted murder in connection with the shooting, alleging they had followed Chinx from the club before opening fire on his car. Chinx's case doesn't line up with the same precision as some of the others here. There's no eerie interview, no album title that reads like a headline, no lyric that names an exact age or scenario. What he left behind instead was a much quieter kind of honesty, an artist who'd already made peace in his own music with the idea that the life he was living carried a real chance of ending exactly the way it did. Chinx's case is about a general acceptance of danger rather than a specific detail lining up with what happened. The next 2 cases are different from every other name on this list because the danger those artists were singing about wasn't coming from anyone else. It was coming from inside their own lives, and both of them seemed to understand that better than anyone around them did. Juice WRLD. Juice WRLD's rise was fast even by rap standards. Jared Higgins broke through in 2018 with Lucid Dreams, a song that eventually went diamond and turned him into one of the defining voices of a new, emotionally raw generation of rappers. He built a devoted following by rapping openly about anxiety, heartbreak, and substance abuse in a way that felt less like posturing and more like a diary entry, which is part of what made his 2018 song, Legends, hit so differently once people revisited it after his death. Legends was written as a tribute to 2 other young artists who died before their time, Lil Peep, who died from an accidental overdose in November 2017 at 21, and X, who was murdered the same month the song's parent EP came out in June 2018. In the first verse, Juice WRLD rapped, "What's the 27 club? We ain't making it past 21," directly referencing the group of famous musicians, including Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Kurt Cobain, who all died at age 27, and pointing out that artists in his own generation were dying even younger than that. In a 2018 interview with 16bars.tv, TV. Juice WRLD explained the line himself, saying he was speaking to how his entire generation of young rappers was treated like it was cursed. He wasn't being cryptic about it. He was naming the exact pattern out loud in real time while he was still very much a part of it. On December 8, 2019, just 1 week after turning 21 years old, Juice WRLD suffered a seizure while walking through Chicago's Midway International Airport. He was bleeding when paramedics arrived, and he was rushed to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead. According to the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office, the official cause of death was an accidental overdose involving codeine and oxycodone. He died at 21 years old, the exact age he'd named in Legends more than a year earlier on The Nose. The re-release of Legends spiked immediately after his death, climbing back onto the Billboard Hot 100 as fans revisited the lyric that had turned out to be almost mathematically precise. Unlike the other cases on this list, there was no armed robbery, no rival, no home invasion behind Juice WRLD's death. His had nothing to do with sudden violence and everything to do with a battle that was already visible in his own music years before it caught up with him, one he'd been rapping about honestly the entire time. Juice WRLD's case is about a lyric that turned out to be almost mathematically exact. This last case is about an artist who posted a caption that read like a goodbye on the very same day it turned out to be one. Lil Peep. Lil Peep, real name Gustav R., built a cult following almost entirely through mixtapes. He uploaded himself to SoundCloud, blending emo rock influences with hip-hop in a way that felt genuinely new. By 2017, he'd released his first full-length album, Come Over When You're Sober, Part 1, was modeling for European fashion labels and had become one of the most talked about young voices in the entire genre, all while being remarkably candid in both interviews and his music about the depression and drug use that shaped his daily life. I suffer from depression, and some days I wake up and I'm like, I wish I didn't wake up, he told Pitchfork earlier that year. On November 15, 2017, Lil Peep was in Tucson, Arizona, ahead of a scheduled tour stop. Earlier that day, he posted to his Instagram, sharing a photo of himself with a pill on his tongue, captioned simply it, followed by a second post that read, "When I die, you'll love me." He also posted about having just taken mushrooms. These weren't cryptic song lyrics buried in an album. They were his own real-time, same-day posts, hours before anyone knew anything was wrong. Later that evening, Lil Peep was found unresponsive on his tour bus by his manager. Emergency responders were called immediately, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 21 years old. The Pima County Medical Examiner's Office later confirmed the cause of death as the combined toxic effects of fentanyl and alprazolam, the generic form of Xanax. Rolling Stone's extensive investigation into his final months, based on interviews with those closest to him and a review of police, autopsy, and toxicology records, concluded that his death was ruled an accident and that he almost certainly didn't know the substance he took contained enough fentanyl to be lethal on its own. Peep's death sits somewhere between the others on this list. He wasn't murdered, and there's no indication he intended to die that day, but the caption he posted hours before it happened, paired with years of him rapping and speaking openly about wanting to disappear, made his final Instagram post feel less like an isolated dark joke and more like the plainest possible statement of where he'd actually been for a long time. Sometimes the clearest warning sign isn't a lyric that needs to be decoded years later. Sometimes it's something said in plain language, the same day, that nobody around him had the chance to catch in time. There's no way to know for certain whether any of these artists actually sensed what was coming or whether hindsight just makes ordinary lyrics and offhand comments feel more meaningful once tragedy gives them a new context. What's clear is that all 8 of these artists were living with real danger, whether that danger came from the streets around them or from something they were carrying inside themselves, and none of it waited around for good timing. That's part of what makes their stories stick with people. It's not that they predicted the future, it's that they were honest about a present that was more dangerous than most of us will ever have to think about. And if you enjoyed this one, you'll definitely want to check out these videos on your screen next. Have a good one.